9. The Savior Returns. Written by Celestial Rainbow. Narrated by AJ the Elementalgod. Chapter 1. Nightmares and Moving On. His legs ached and his heart was pounding. The burning cartridal seemed miles upon miles away. No matter how fast he ran, he couldn't reach it. But he could clearly see the raging fire coming from the church in the distance, illuminating the night sky. He ran through the emptiness, past the destruction, until he finally reached the cartridal. The cold night air was quickly replaced by burning smoke and dancing inferno. But this didn't stop him. He dodged the flames, knowing he was out of time. He ran through the cartridal that he had briefly called home. Racing through room after room, the smoke and the flames blocked his vision. And as he searched the church desperately, he needed to find them before it happened all over again. Over the roar of the fire, he could hear their terrified screams as their souls were ripped from their bodies. The dead were dropped to the floor, limp and lifeless. Ravenous for more, the monster took its next victim. Their cries echoed throughout the rooms as if they surrounded them, but no matter where he looked, he couldn't find them. It was his fault. All his fault. He woke the monster, and he couldn't get them fast enough. They would never be freed now. He was badly burnt and exhausted when he finally reached the room where the massacre was taking place. Long wooden benches were piled against the walls, nothing more than splintered, blazing wreckage. A shattering, stained glass window of a male angel decorated one wall. He skid to the stop on the blackened wooden floor and gasped in horror, eyes widened as he looked upon a horrible sight. The fabrication machine was screeching in triumph, no longer lying dead out in the emptiness where it belonged. It dropped a small body from its iron clutches, the sparks of life surrounding its gleaming crimson eye as it absorbed the soul. The body that fell to the floor was little Thor. He was dead. His small, innocent spirit now absorbed by the machine. His body lay next to his lifeless brother, 3. As he saw the poor little stitch punks, he gasped. As he now saw the entire scene, his heart shattered. 2 was lying on his side, the frail elder broken. 1 was lying sprawled on his back, a few inches away from 8. The Guardian had obviously tried to save his leader. He failed in doing so, as he was lying on his chest, his mouth gaping grotesquely wide, his outstretched fingers nearly touching one's arm. 6 was lying crumpled on his side. He was covered in ink from his broken fingers. 5 was nearest to him, eye patch burnt, through the lying sprawl on his back. He gave a cry in horror as he lied down upon his best friend. Running towards him, he kneeled beside his body. Laying his hands upon 5's chest, he shook from grief, knowing it was useless to try to wake his friend. His head then snapped up to the sound of a familiar battle cry. 7's skullmet was bravely pulled over her face, her spear clutching in her hands. Her pale white body was brightly illuminated, burns streaked throughout her skin. She was trying to fight the fabrication machine herself. The brave and dauntless female stitch punk dodged the claws with interpreted grace, her ferocity keeping her alive. She wasn't dead yet. He wanted to call out to her, to tell her not to destroy the talisman. He needed it to get the souls back and kill the machine. Suddenly, Shrieking angrily, the metallic monster overwhelmed her with its claws. It knocked her spear into the fire, then tripped her. She fell to the ground with a cry. "No!" he yelled, and tried to run towards her, panicking more powerful than pain. "Not her. Not Seven. Please don't kill her. Not her," he thought desperately. The fire seemed to grow hotter as he tried to run through it. The harder he tried to reach Seven, the slower he became. He tried to save the female before it took her, before he was alone. But his knees were unable to hold the rest of his body up any longer. The weakness and the pain were overwhelming him. The talisman glowed eerily green as the machine held a fiercely struggling Seven in its iron clutches. 3 long trails of green light burst through the plates. The deadly light struck her full force in the face. She was jerked forward involuntarily as it tore her strong soul right out of her body. He finally collapsed to the ground, incapable of taking another step forward. His eyes widened. He reached for the dying Seven. His heart stopped as he succumbed to the flames. The bellowing fire grew larger. It was killing her. "No!" he screamed. His flames engulfed him. "No!" In an instant, the fabrication machine and the inferno were swept away. It's replaced by the cool night air. A slight breeze following through the city. The stars twinkled sincerely above the dark night. The dead stitch punks, the fire, and the machine all disappeared. As Nine woke from the nightmare, he bolted upright, chest heaving and mechanical heart hammering. His shaking fingers were clamping so tight in his fist he was a wonder his palms didn't crack. The echo of his screams hung into the crisp night air above him. He blinked rapidly, trying to figure out exactly where he was. He was no longer in the burning Cartridal, but lying out in the open. Dead 5, dead 7, 7, 9. The voice of his nightmares asked him. He jumped slightly and turned a bit, facing Seven. Her brows were furrowed in a worry, and she was sitting up as well. The twins were looking up at him anxiously, their eyes flickering. It was apparent that he had woke the 3 of them with his scream of horror. The twins still lay on the ground, curled up against the cold night breeze. Oh, sorry," he gasped, averting his eyes. He struggled for a breath, nearly overwhelmed by panic and shock. "It's okay. Go back to sleep," Seven said soothingly to the twins, reaching forward with a hand and stroking their shoulders in reassurance. They glanced at one another, but laid back down. They curled up and closed their eyes. As soon as Seven was sure that the twins were calm and falling back asleep, he turned to Nine. He was rubbing the sides of his optics recitingly, eyes closed, trying to wash the images of the nightmare from his mind. "It was just a dream," he told himself. "It was just a dream. We're safe. It wasn't real. It was just a dream." "Nine?" she asked him gently. He sighed and dropped his hands to rest his knees before turning to face her, slightly calmer now. I'm sorry I woke you," he murmured softly. Are the twins okay?" "I'm fine, and so are the twins. What about you? Are you all right?" she asked him, looking worried. She peered into his face anxiously. He managed to nod, trying to keep the shaking of his hands under control. I'm fine, Seven. It was just a dream. A nightmare," he said. His tense body finally relaxed, and he leaned against the wooden wall behind him. Seven laid a hand on his shoulder of concern. Are you sure you're okay? She asked persistently. I'm fine, he reassured her, reaching up and grasping her hand. Seven frowned, looking unconvinced, but then drew back. She laid back down, closing her eyes, and fell asleep once more. Her soft, slow breathing filled the desolate silence. Nine watched her and the twins for a moment before he laid down and noticed the stars for a moment. Sighing to himself, for a moment he relived in the memory of his friend's death, as he had in the nightmare. He frowned, the memory still very fresh and very painful. Sighing, Nine turned over and closed his eyes, trying to get back to sleep. Images of a dead seven, the dead twins, dead five, dead everyone, filled his mind, troubling his sleep for the remainder of that terrible night. Calm shadow of sleep abrupted end as something shook his shoulder gently, jerking him to his awareness. Nine. A familiar voice accompanied the shaking. Come on, it's time to move. Okay, he said sleepily, stretching. He yawned widely and sat up. I'm up. Well, good morning to you, she teased, smiling gently at him. He blinked and managed to give her a smile, a tired one. Good morning, he replied, getting to his feet. Swiftly another yawn as Seven followed. Where are the twins? They're playing nearby, Seven replied. Her brows furrowed and her smile disappeared. She faced Nine. But the one I'm currently worried about is you. You seemed pretty frightened last night. Are you okay? Yeah, I'm fine. Don't worry, he replied, trying to smile at her again. But finding out that he couldn't bring himself to, he turned away, rubbing his back and his head wearily. You're sure? She pressed. Seven, really, I'm sure I'm fine, he said, finally pushing himself to get her a reassuring smile. She sighed in defeat, shaking her head, and turned away from him. I don't believe you. I'm going to get the twins, she said, brows knitted in annoyance. Nine sighed, watching her as she disappeared around the corner to find the two boys. Closing his eyes for a moment, he jadedly leaned against the wall behind him. He felt a fresh wave of dismay crush upon him as he recollected the horrendous nightmares of the night before. How real it had been. Even the pain of the heat from the fire felt real. Later that day, 9, 7 were walking together while the twins frolicked around. They jumped on and off rubble and other things strewn along the ground, flickering at one another excitedly as they chased one another. 7 and 9 smiled in laughter as they both tumbled into one another, falling to the ground and sprang back up. Their eyes were alit with silent laughter. As he watched them play, Nine found himself wishing that the others were here to see the twins' adorable antics as well. The smile slid off his face and he looked to the ground below him. Nine, I know something is bothering you, Seven said, peering into his face, noticing his sudden change in mood. He looked up at her and then averted his eyes once more, ashamed to even look at her in the face. He was overwhelmingly reminded that she had once loved them too. It's just hard to live on while the others are. He trailed off, and the silence hung in the air before he continued. I just wish I could make things right again. Have a second chance. He finished softly, closing his eyes and sighed quietly. He opened his eyes once again, then Seven gently took his hand into hers. I know, Nine, but it'll be okay. The others are all right. They're at peace now, and there's nothing we can do. But we still have the twins, and sooner or later, you'll have a place to call home. We're safe now, she said, clutching his hand to get tighter. He gave an answering, grateful gasp. The two continued to walk together, hand in hand, dark clouds above the threatening rain. Seven cast a weary glance up at them before turning back to the younger man who was watching the twins play. I think we need to rest tonight. Get down early, she said to him. He tore his eyes from the twins and looked at her, a puzzled expression on his face. But we need to find a... He began to sound worrying. I know. We need to find a home. 9. Seven finished his sentence. But I don't want to exhaust the twins. We've been getting up at dawn and going to sleep at midnight for over 5 weeks now, she said, sounding worried about the little ones. As she glanced at him, 9 followed her gaze. Flora had sat down on a torn and tattered book for a moment. He was rubbing his optics and sighing slightly. He was yawning widely, sitting beside his twin and stretching. All right, we'll rest longer tonight, he agreed, still watching the boys. Seven smiled faintly. Thank you, 9, she said, sounding grateful. 9 looked down at her and gave her a small smile. 3 then took 4's hand, heaving him to his feet. Their weariness had forgotten for a moment as they continued to play happily. That night, they stopped to rest once more. They nestled tightly together underneath a metal overhang, which appeared to be part of a rusted automobile door. 9 had found some old but clean funnel sheets. They had a little nest in the corner and their shelter, and they rested. 9 had taken heed to Seven's words before the moon was barely in the sky. The twins were curled up together, already sound asleep. 7 was stretched out on her side and her back against 9's hip. He, however, was still awake. His knees were held to his chest, arms crossed over them, chin to his forearms. He was staring up into the stars. There was a small hole in the overhang. They sparkled serenely once the clouds from earlier had moved on elsewhere. 5, he said softly, not wanting to wake 7 and the twins again. I need help. I need a lot of help. I don't know what's best. I don't know what to do anymore. I need you. I really do. Please answer me. He pleaded up to the moon. Everything remained silent. 9 received no reply at all. Disappointment overtook him. Though he was gone, 9 still missed 5 deeply. He would have known how to guide him to the right direction. His eyes seemed heavy. 7 was right. They did need more rest. He had been asking too much of them. What a foolish leader he made. Even worse than 1. He thought to himself as he lay down resting his aching joints. A low metallic creak broke the silence as he stretched out his legs and was still quite new to the world. And all this traveling without much rest took a toll on his body. He glanced at 7 and raised a hand. He gently touched her shoulder, rubbing gently. She was too deeply asleep to acknowledge this simple but tender touch. and was forever grateful that Seven was still his friend, after how much pain he had caused her. He withdrew and looked back to the stars. They were still silent. He knew they were never going to answer him. Sighing sadly, he closed his eyes slowly, the warmth from Seven's body making him all more tired. He quietly fell into a quiet, peaceful sleep. The end of chapter 1.